God, why did I let it get this far? I muttered under my breath, staring at the blank page in front of me. I'm Nicole, and for most of my life I've been invisible, lost in the shadow of the perfect daughter Claire. But what happens when you stop pretending to be someone else? Let's just say, things are about to get very interesting. Every morning feels like a quiet ritual, a steadying moment before the chaos of the day begins. I wake up early, before the world around me stirs, and make myself a cup of espresso. The rich, deep aroma fills the air, bringing a sense of calm to the otherwise still apartment. I don't need much else to start my day. The weather report plays in the background as I sit by the window, watching the sun begin to rise and cast its golden glow on the sleepy streets below. It's these moments, the simplicity of a cup of coffee in a quiet morning, that I hold on to the most. They are mine, and mine alone. I live in a small town, about a 50-minute drive from Boston. It's peaceful here, almost too quiet at times, but that's part of the charm. The town is small enough for me to walk to my office, which is just over a block away from home. It's a luxury I don't take for granted. Most people in the city spend their mornings in traffic or packed subway trains. But for me, it's just a short walk to my small office where I get to work on something I've poured my heart into, a biotech startup focused on healthcare. It's the type of job that's hard to explain to people who don't really understand the industry. Biotech, I say, and people nod politely, but I can tell they don't truly get it. In their eyes, I'm just another person who works behind a desk, typing away at numbers or emails. But it's more than that. Much more. There's a small part of me that wishes my family could understand that. I want them to see the long nights, the countless hours I've spent at the office, the hard work that's gone into building this company from the ground up with 3 college friends. Yet, every time I try to explain, they just don't seem to get it. I remember Thanksgiving and Christmas like they were yesterday. The relatives would always gather around her, praising her like she was some sort of star. "Claire, you look stunning in that dress," they'd say. "Claire, your new boyfriend's a doctor? Impressive." And then, if anyone even remembered I existed, it was always something brief, something distant. "Nicole? Oh yeah, she's doing something in biotech." It was like they had to throw in my name as an afterthought, a footnote at the bottom of the page. I remember the frustration that would bubble up inside me, but I'd always swallow it down. Maybe if I worked harder, stayed behind the scenes and did everything they expected, they would finally see me too. But no. All the compliments, all the attention, all the pride, they were always for Claire. It never came my way, and I couldn't help but wonder, what was it about her that made her so easy to love? What was it about me that made me so hard to understand? "Nicole, you're always so quiet," they'd say. "Why are you always so serious?" I would smile and nod, but the truth was, I wasn't just serious. I was tired. Tired of feeling invisible. Tired of feeling like I was always second place. Tired of never being enough. The comparison between Claire and me was more than just an occasional comment or remark. It was embedded in the very fabric of our family dynamics. Every holiday, every family event, every conversation somehow circled back to her. It felt like I was perpetually in her shadow no matter what I did. Even though I worked hard, built something meaningful, and lived a life that required serious commitment and focus, it was always Claire who earned the spotlight. It was as if I wasn't even part of the equation, just a faint, distant presence. I kept wondering, why did they always look at me through the lens of comparison? What was it about her that made her so easy to admire, and me so difficult to understand? One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the soft hum of the city outside, I thought about all the times I had tried to prove myself. I wanted to be seen, truly seen. But no matter how much I worked, no matter how successful my startup became, my family's focus remained on Claire. She was the one who excelled in everything they valued. Her beauty, her elegance, her ability to charm everyone she met. And me was always the serious one, the one who worked too much, the one who didn't quite fit their image of what a daughter should be. I could almost hear their voices now. "Nicole, you're so different from Claire. Why are you always so quiet? Why do you work so much? You need to take a break." I'd smile, trying to appear at ease, but inside, it felt like I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations. The truth was, I didn't want to be like Claire. I didn't want to wear fancy dresses, or always have to be charming in a way that felt fake. I didn't want to be someone I wasn't just to fit into a mold that had been created for me before I could even speak for myself. I had my own path, my own goals, and my own definition of success. But all of that seemed irrelevant to them. There were days, especially after family gatherings, when I'd find myself wondering, what would it take for them to see me? To recognize the value I brought into the world, not just as their daughter, but as Nicole, the woman who had worked tirelessly to build something from scratch? I knew the answer. It would take me no longer trying to prove myself. It would take me stepping back and simply living without needing their validation, without needing them to see me in the same light they saw Claire. And yet, despite all my efforts to create a boundary, I still yearned for their approval. I couldn't quite shake that feeling of wanting to belong, even when I knew that the family I longed for didn't really exist. I remember one particular moment during Thanksgiving, when everyone was gathered around Claire, laughing and praising her. I was sitting on the edge of the conversation, not really part of it, just watching from the outside. It wasn't that I hated her. It wasn't even that I resented her. I was just tired. Tired of feeling invisible. Tired of being the one who was never the focus, the one who never received the kind of warmth they so freely gave to Claire. My parents hadn't said a word to me that night, other than the usual, "How's work?" But even that felt like a formality. They didn't care to know the details, didn't care to understand what I was doing. It was just the question they asked because they felt they had to. "Nicole, are you okay?" Claire asked me once, her voice almost sounding concerned. I looked up, slightly startled, not used to the warmth in her tone. For a moment I almost thought she cared, but then I realized it was just a moment, a fleeting gesture, and just like that, it passed. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." I wasn't fine, though. I hadn't been for a long time. But I never showed it. I never let them see how much it hurt to always feel like I had to measure up to someone else's expectations. And even now, as I thought about it, I knew I would never be enough. Not unless I stopped pretending to be what they wanted me to be. And so, there it was, the truth I had been running from. I wasn't ever going to be Claire. I wasn't going to win their approval by being someone I wasn't. Maybe the only way to feel like I mattered was to stop caring whether they saw me at all. I didn't know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the accumulation of years spent in the shadows, the endless comparisons, the smiles I forced when all I wanted was to scream. Maybe it was the frustration of feeling like my achievements didn't count, like I was invisible, a footnote in my family's story. But one thing was certain, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to keep pretending anymore. I wasn't going to keep trying to prove myself to people who would never see me as anything other than the other daughter. It all started with that phone call from my dad. I remember it so clearly. It was March, late in the evening, the air still chilly, and I was sitting at my desk, reviewing documents for the latest project I had just closed. My startup had reached a major milestone, and I was on top of the world. Or at least, I should have felt that way. Instead, my chest tightened when I saw my dad's name pop up on the screen. Something about his tone always made me uneasy, as though I was about to disappoint him. Again. "Nicole," he said, his voice sounding more distant than usual. "I need to talk to you about Mom's birthday this year." I sat back in my chair, already sensing the direction this conversation was going. I'd always made an effort to help out with the preparations, to be there, to show up even when I wasn't feeling like part of the family. I was the one who handled the logistics, who picked up last-minute groceries, who set up the decorations. It wasn't much, but it was my way of showing them I cared, even if they never really saw it. "I'm planning to come home early this year," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I've cleared my schedule, so let me know if there's anything I can do to help." There was a pause on the other end. The silence stretched for a moment, and then my dad spoke again, his tone oddly firm. "Nicole, if possible, don't come home this year." My stomach dropped. "What? Why?" I tried to keep the confusion from my voice, but it was impossible. "Claire is bringing her new boyfriend," he continued. His words blunt. He's a CFO, well-spoken, successful. Your job, well, it's hard to explain. You showing up would just invite comparisons and make things awkward. It's best you stay." I felt a cold rush of shock flood through me. My fingers trembled around the phone. "Are you saying that I shouldn't come home because I make the family look bad? That I'm embarrassing?" There was no hesitation in his voice when he answered. "If you insist on coming, then don't call me your father." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I felt frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as the phone call ended abruptly. He didn't even give me a chance to say anything more. I sat there in my apartment, the silence suddenly deafening. My espresso sat untouched on the counter, cold and forgotten. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, my thoughts spinning. It was as if the floor beneath me had given way. For the first time in my life, I realized something that I had always avoided. I was no longer part of the family I had desperately tried to hold together. For years, I had believed that if I worked hard enough, if I kept my head down, one day they would see me. One day they would recognize everything I had done, everything I had sacrificed. But now, with my father's words echoing in my ears, I understood the truth. No matter how much I gave, no matter how much I cared, it would never be enough. I wasn't their daughter in the way they wanted me to be. I was just a burden, a disappointment they didn't want to deal with. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to keep trying to explain myself. I was done. I walked over to my desk, opened my banking app, and looked at the account history. For the past 2 years, I had been sending money to my parents. Nearly $6,000 a month, without fail. They never asked how I was doing, never asked if I could afford it. They just expected me to keep sending it, to keep helping them when things went wrong. And I did. Quietly. I did it because I thought I had to. Because that was what family did. Or at least, that was what I thought it was supposed to be. The total was over $15,000. My heart sank. Not because I regretted helping, but because I realized I had been pouring my energy and money into a family who didn't care enough to ask if I was okay. Not once had they ever acknowledged the sacrifices I made, or the hours I worked, or the stress I endured to keep things running smoothly. Without thinking, I began to cancel the automatic payments. One by one, the bills were paid off, the utilities turned off. I didn't need to ask for their permission. I had already been invisible to them for years. Now I was simply turning off the invisible strings that had kept me tied to this unbalanced, toxic relationship. As the payments were canceled, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't doing something out of obligation. I was doing it for myself. And that, finally, felt right. The days following my decision were eerily quiet. The rhythm of my life didn't change much on the surface, but underneath, everything felt different. There was a calmness to my routine that I hadn't felt before. I kept working, pushing my biotech startup forward, the meetings, the strategy sessions, the financial reports. All of it continued as usual. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control over my life. I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone anymore. I wasn't waiting for validation from a family who didn't seem to care whether I lived or died. I had freed myself from the shackles of their expectations, and it was both terrifying and liberating. I didn't hear from them in the days after I canceled the payments. It was as if they were waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to reach out. But I didn't. I refused. I had spent my entire life catering to their needs, bending myself into a shape that fit their version of who I should be. And now I was done. The silence didn't bother me the way it used to. In fact, it felt like a moment of peace, a space where I could finally hear my own thoughts without the weight of their voices pressing in from every direction. The real turning point came a week later, on the morning of my mother's birthday. The sky was overcast, a soft gray fog lingering in the air, as if the weather itself was holding its breath. I sat at my desk, sipping my coffee, and watching the drizzle fall outside the window. It was a strange kind of stillness, one that felt both heavy and calming. I had decided long ago that I wasn't going to call them, wasn't going to send a card or a message. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't play the role of the daughter who was always there to fix things, to make everything right for them when they needed me. Not after the way they had dismissed me. Not after the way my father had spoken to me. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of that little tug inside, the part of me that still wondered, would they even notice I was gone? Just as I was lost in that thought, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from my mother. "Nicole, sweetheart, I think the power's out. Can you check for us? It's an important day." I stared at the message, my heart skipping a beat. It was just like them, wasn't it? The same old requests, the same old routine. I put my phone down without replying, not out of spite, but because I knew what this was. I had already been there for them, too many times to count. And yet, no matter what I did, I was never truly seen, never truly appreciated. A few minutes later, another message popped up, this time from my father. "Still no power. Water's not running. Is something wrong with the payments? Call the provider now." It hit me again, the realization that I was just a tool for them, a solution to their problems, and nothing more. They never asked how I was doing, never asked if I was okay or if I needed help. They never cared about what it felt like to be constantly compared, to be pushed aside while Claire took center stage. They only cared when something went wrong, when something broke down, when they needed something fixed. And then, of course, there was Claire. The third message came from her. "The internet's down and Mom's freaking out. Guests are coming, what's going on?" I read it, my eyes scanning the words, but they didn't hold the same weight they once had. The need to please her, to fix things for her, was gone. In that moment, I wasn't her backup plan anymore. I wasn't the one she could rely on to clean up the messes when things fell apart. I was done. I typed a response, but I didn't send it. I thought about it for a moment, about how I used to feel the need to explain myself, to justify my silence, my distance. But now it didn't matter. I deleted the message and set my phone down. For the first time, I felt free from their grip. There was no guilt. There was no anger. Just a calm, steady clarity that I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. The truth was simple. I wasn't a solution to their problems. I wasn't their fixer. I was Nicole, and I was enough as I was. The rest of the day passed slowly. The messages from my family kept coming, one after the other, but I ignored them. I didn't feel the need to answer. By now, I knew they would never understand. They would never get it. But that was okay. I didn't need them to. As the evening set in, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the last light of day fade into night. The weight in my chest had lifted. The emptiness was no longer painful. It was peaceful. I wasn't waiting for a thank you. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I had stopped waiting for their approval. The only thing I was waiting for now was the next chapter. A chapter where I got to decide who I was and who I wanted to be. A chapter where I could finally be free. The days that followed were filled with a kind of eerie calm. The world outside continued its endless motion. Cars passed by, the seasons shifted from spring to summer, and I worked hard, as I always did, at my office. But something had fundamentally changed in me. I had let go of the need for approval, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the constant weight of family expectations. There was no more pretending, no more forcing myself into a role that wasn't mine. Yet, despite my decision to move on, the reality of what I had done began to settle in. The silence from my family grew more intense. At first, I had felt a quiet, almost victorious sense of relief from their demands. But soon, that relief turned into something more complex: emptiness. They weren't just absent from my life, they were actively distancing themselves from me. In the days after I'd stopped paying their bills, after I had canceled the automatic payments without a second thought, I realized just how little they had ever considered me as a person, as anything more than a resource to be used when convenient. They had never truly seen me. Not as a daughter, not as a sister. And that fact stung more than I expected. One evening, as I sat at my desk working on a particularly challenging project, my phone buzzed. The name that appeared on the screen was familiar, though I hadn't seen it in over 2 years. My mother. I paused for a moment, my heart skipping in my chest. It had been so long since we'd spoken, and part of me wondered what this call would bring. I hesitated before answering. The familiar knot in my stomach twisted. Was this a reconciliation? Or another request for help? wrapped in the guise of concern. I hit the green button and raised the phone to my ear. "Nicole," my mother's voice sounded tentative, almost tired. I know it's been a while, and I know things have been difficult, but we need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. The air in the room felt dense, heavy with the unspoken words that had accumulated between us over the years. I wanted to say something, anything, that would acknowledge the gap that had grown between us. But the words didn't come. Instead, I just listened. "We're struggling, Nicole," she continued, her voice cracking just slightly. "Your father, he's been acting distant. And Claire, well, she's been going through a tough time too. We need your help." I could feel the weight of her request hanging in the air. There it was, the familiar pattern, the same demand I had always faced. They needed something from me, just like they always had. But this time, I wasn't the same person who had once blindly given everything without question. This time, I wasn't going to fall back into that familiar suffocating role. I took a deep breath, the decision already made in my mind. "I understand that things are hard for you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I'm not going to keep sacrificing myself for a family that only reaches out when it's convenient. You've never asked me how I'm doing. You've never asked if I need anything. You've only ever come to me when there's a bill to pay or a problem to." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear my mother's breath catch, like she didn't know how to respond, or maybe for the first time, she didn't have an answer. "I'm not asking for your money anymore, Mom," I continued, my words calm but firm. "I've given enough. And I can't keep doing this, not when you never seem to care about what I need or how I feel." "I never meant to hurt you, Nicole," she whispered, her voice almost pleading now, "but I don't know what else to do." I felt the sting of her words, the realization that this was it. This was the moment when everything had shifted, and I would no longer be the daughter they could take for granted. But I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt empty. "I know," I said softly, "but I've reached my limit." I hung up the phone, the quiet settling over me again, more final this time. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel the familiar tug of obligation that had always pulled me back into their orbit. I had made my decision, and I had followed through. The silence, the absence of their demands, didn't feel cold anymore. It felt like a freedom I had never known. I had spent so long trying to please them, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. But now, as the weeks passed, I could see the truth more clearly than ever before. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the one who needed to change. They were. As my phone sat on the desk in front of me, I didn't pick it up to check for messages or calls. Instead, I turned my attention back to the work in front of me. There were meetings to attend, partners to liaise with, and new projects to develop, and for the first time I was fully present, fully engaged. I didn't need to look back anymore. My life was my own, and I was finally living it for myself. The days went by, and the absence of my family in my life felt less and less painful. It wasn't because I didn't care about them anymore. It was because I had come to understand that love shouldn't be based on expectations, obligation, or sacrifice. It should be built on respect, mutual understanding, and a willingness to see each other for who we truly are, not for what we can give. And as I moved forward, I didn't look back. The weeks that followed were an exercise in reinvention. It was strange, the quietness of life without the constant tug of family obligations. I had finally reclaimed my time, my peace, my space. I didn't feel lonely, though. In fact, for the first time in years, I felt like I had room to breathe. Work took on a new meaning. Every meeting, every decision, every challenge at Pacific Genomics felt like an opportunity for me to build something for myself. Something that no one could take away. I had spent too long trying to build things for others, and now, finally, I was focused on building my own success. But then came a knock on the door that I hadn't been expecting. It was a Saturday afternoon when the doorbell rang. The sound was almost jarring, pulling me out of the comfortable rhythm I had settled into. I wasn't expecting anyone. In fact, I rarely had visitors. My life was simple and quiet, just the way I liked it. But something, maybe a sense of curiosity, drove me to answer. When I opened the door, I was greeted by an image I hadn't seen in over 2 years. My parents, standing on my doorstep. My mother held a small bag, her face tired and worn, and my father stood beside her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His eyes were not as stern as the last time we spoke, but the hardness in them was still there, like a shield he hadn't quite put down. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was an awkwardness in the air, an undeniable tension that hung between us. The silence was heavy. I stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do, what to say. After everything that had happened, the phone calls, the canceled payments, the years of feeling overlooked and unappreciated, this moment felt surreal. "Hi, honey," my mother said finally, her voice strained. "We were hoping we could come in and talk." I stepped aside, silently allowing them to enter. The moment felt strange, almost out of place, as if this wasn't really happening, but there they were, standing in my apartment like nothing had changed. They sat down in the living room, and I quietly poured water into 2 glasses, setting them down in front of them. I didn't offer anything more. No pleasantries, no awkward small talk. The weight of the conversation ahead was already so heavy, I didn't see the need to fill the air with anything else. After a moment of silence, my father spoke. "Nicole, about your mother's birthday last year, I said some things I shouldn't have." I didn't respond. Instead, I simply nodded. I wasn't sure what to say. The anger, the pain, it had been there, but it had faded into something quieter, something I couldn't quite name. My father, despite his usual brusqueness, seemed different. I could see it in his eyes. He was trying. Trying, perhaps, to make amends for something he didn't fully understand. My mother looked down at her hands, her voice softer now. "We've been thinking. Maybe we've been too hard on you. Maybe we've been too focused on Claire. Things have been difficult lately, and we just wanted to sit down and talk like a family." For a second, I almost felt the old pull of guilt, like I was supposed to open my arms and welcome them back, forgive them for the years of neglect and indifference. But I held firm. I had moved past that, and I wasn't going to slip back into old patterns just because they showed up at my door. "You know," I said, my voice calm but steady, "I've been the one trying, for years. But every time I tried to get close, every time I did something, it was never enough. I was always the one who wasn't good enough, the one who had to do more, be more. You never really asked about my life, you never asked if I was okay." My words hung in the air, not with anger, but with the clarity that had taken me so long to reach. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about them saying the right thing or even taking responsibility. It was about me accepting that I had done all I could. "We didn't know how much we were hurting you," my mother said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. The words didn't hit me like a revelation, but they did make something inside me stir. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was a long-buried desire for acknowledgement, but I didn't let it show. "I know," I replied, "but I can't keep being the person who fixes everything. I can't keep pretending like I don't deserve more." My father looked at me, his expression softening. "So, what do you want, Nicole? What do you need from us?" I didn't have a prepared answer. For the first time, I wasn't asking for anything, because I realized I had already given enough. "You can't buy my love with money," I said, keeping my tone even. "I've been paying for your problems for years and I'm done. I don't want a contract, or a promise, or a gesture. I want a family that sees me for who I am, not for what I can do for you." There was a long silence. My parents looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the truth I was laying out for them. My father was the first to speak. "What if we asked for your help? Just this once, like we used to? Can we start over?" I met his gaze, then looked over at my mother. I didn't feel angry or hurt or even sad. I just felt indifferent. I wasn't their caretaker anymore. "I think you need to start by looking at your own lives," I said softly. "You can't keep relying on me to fix things for you, and I'm not going to be your fallback anymore. If you really want to change, you'll have to do it for yourselves." They were silent for a moment longer, and then, without another word, they stood up to leave. My mother gave me a brief, unsure hug, and my father just nodded, a terse gesture that felt oddly final. When they left, the door closed softly behind them, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to chase after them, to explain myself further. I had said what needed to be said, and now I was free. I returned to my desk, to my quiet apartment, and to the work I loved. I didn't need to chase after anyone anymore. I didn't need to prove anything. I was finally living life on my own terms, and that was enough. The quiet after my parents' visit lingered in the apartment, but it was different this time. I wasn't haunted by their absence or the unspoken expectations that had always loomed over me. In fact, the silence felt almost like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Familiar, yet new. I had spent so much of my life trying to fill the space around me with their demands, their opinions, and their expectations, but now there was a calmness in simply being. I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, hoping to be seen or validated. For weeks after their visit, the phone remained eerily quiet. No calls from my parents, no messages from Claire. It wasn't the emptiness I feared, it was the space I had created for myself. I didn't need to fill it with noise anymore. I had spent so much time trying to be something I wasn't. Something that would finally make my family proud. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. My life was mine to live, on my terms, and that was a revelation that still felt surreal every time I allowed myself to truly feel it. Then came the unexpected. One day, while I was sitting at my desk in the office, reviewing some investment proposals, I noticed an email pop up from Claire. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not since she sent that desperate message after Liam had broken up with her. I hadn't replied then, and I didn't expect I would now. But I clicked open the email anyway. "Nicole, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I need your help." I sat back in my chair. I hadn't expected this. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I read the next line. "I know things have been hard between us and I don't deserve your help after everything, but I've really screwed up. I've lost my job and things are falling apart. I don't have anyone else to turn to." Her words were raw, vulnerable in a way that felt both familiar and foreign. It wasn't the Claire I remembered, the Claire who always had everything figured out, the one who never showed weakness. This version of her was different, broken even, and for a moment, I felt a small tug in my chest. Was this my chance to be the sister I never got to be? Was I supposed to fix this for her like I always had? I closed my eyes, letting the silence of the room wash over me. I had spent so many years feeling like I was the one who had to pick up the pieces, to be the one who always fixed things. But was I really obligated to do it this time? Was I really supposed to drop everything and become the person who rescued her again? I realized something in that moment. The truth was, I didn't owe her that. I didn't owe anyone that anymore. I took a deep breath and began to type. "Claire, I'm sorry to hear that things are difficult right now, but you need to know something. I'm not the person who's going to save you anymore. I've spent my life being the one who fixed things for everyone, and I can't keep doing that. You need to figure things out for yourself." It felt strange to type those words. For so long I had been the fixer, the one who quietly stepped in and took on the burdens others couldn't carry. But now it wasn't about giving, it was about letting go. I needed to let her face her own struggles just as I had faced mine. It wasn't cruel, it was necessary for both of us. "I hope you find your way, but I can't be your crutch anymore. I've learned that the hard way, and I think it's time you do too." I paused, reading over my words, wondering if I would regret them. But deep down I knew I wouldn't. This wasn't about punishment. It wasn't about anger. It was about setting boundaries, something I had never done before. And it was time. I hit send. The message left my inbox and I felt nothing. No regret, no guilt. Just a quiet kind of certainty. The days that followed were almost uneventful. I didn't hear from Claire again, nor did I expect to. But as the weeks passed, something inside me shifted. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I wasn't waiting for some final moment where everything would fall into place. I had already let go. And that, in itself, was the beginning of a new chapter. I kept working, kept focusing on what mattered. My company, my friends, the things that brought me joy. I didn't need to look back anymore. The family I once hoped to have wasn't mine anymore. And that was okay. I had finally learned to put myself first, to stand firm in my worth. And in doing so, I had found something far more valuable than I ever expected, a sense of peace, a sense of belonging to myself. As the weeks turned into months, the changes in my life became more pronounced. I had spent so much time waiting for validation from my family, seeking approval from people who didn't truly understand me, that I had forgotten how to stand on my own. But now, I was finally living for myself, making decisions that were based on my own values and needs, not on what others expected of me. The freedom I had fought for felt more natural with every passing day. My mornings had become my own, no longer filled with the quiet anxiety of whether I was doing enough, whether I was living up to some invisible standard that I had carried with me for years. I would wake up, have my coffee, and head to my office. The work was hard, the decisions were challenging, but I felt grounded. Every meeting, every deal, every email I sent was done with the quiet confidence that I was in control of my life now. I wasn't just a cog in someone else's machine anymore. Yet, despite all the peace I had found, there was a part of me that still held on to a thread of hope. It wasn't hope for a perfect reconciliation with my parents or sister. It was something else. It was a quiet wish that one day they would see me as I truly was. Not as the person they thought I was. Not as the daughter who was always overshadowed, always unseen. But as someone who had worked hard, fought for something meaningful, and finally learned to love herself, despite everything they never gave me. And then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't been expecting. It was from my mother. "Nicole, I know you probably don't want to hear from us right now, but I wanted to apologize for everything. I know I can't undo the past, and I can't change the way things have been. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry for not being the mother you needed. You've always been strong, and I never gave you the credit you deserved." I sat there, staring at the message, the words slowly sinking in. For the first time, my mother had acknowledged the pain, the years of silence, and the way she had treated me. It wasn't an apology that fixed everything, but it was a start. I wasn't looking for an apology to heal the wounds, but in a way it felt like a recognition of what had been lost. A recognition that I wasn't the problem. That I had been deserving of love and respect all along. I didn't immediately respond. I didn't feel the rush to reply right away, because I knew that I didn't need to. I had already made peace with the fact that I couldn't change the past. What I had done for myself over the last few months, the boundaries I had set, the way I had let go of their expectations, was the real victory. But something in me stirred, a part of me that hadn't quite closed the door completely. The next day, I sent a short, simple reply. "Thank you, Mom. I appreciate your words." I didn't need anything more than that. The response wasn't about reconciling or trying to get back to the way things were. It was about acknowledging what had been said, about accepting the apology without the need to relive the past. It was about moving forward, not backward. The silence that followed was comfortable. There were no more grand gestures, no more trying to fix things that were broken beyond repair. My parents and I had reached an unspoken understanding. I had set my boundaries, and for once they were respected. My family wasn't the family I had once dreamed of. But I had created my own version of what family could be. And in that space I had found a sense of peace that I had been searching for all my life. My life was my own now. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I didn't need to fix them or constantly prove myself. I was enough. I had always been enough. And finally, I was living like it. I spent that evening at home with a glass of wine and my favorite playlist filling the room. The music, once a reminder of the lonely hours spent behind a laptop, now felt like an anthem of self-love. I had taken the hard road, the one where I faced my fears and let go of the past. But I had come out stronger on the other side. As I sat there, content in the quiet of my own space, I realized something profound. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for yourself is to stop waiting for others to see you. Sometimes the best thing you can do is finally see yourself. And in doing so, you become the person you were always meant to be. And so, with that thought, I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready. The future was mine to create, and I would live it fully, unapologetically, as the woman I had become.